Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at the buy list for Brilliant Stars. Depending on how much news comes out on Friday, this is either going up on release day or just after release day. But either way, Brilliant Stars is either out or just about to come out, and that means we need to talk about the cards we need to buy. Usual rules apply here. I'm not really going to be talking about attackers. So, for instance, I think Lucario is a really cool deck that is very much worth a test. But if you're going to play Lucario, you need Lucario. If you're not going to play Lucario, you don't need Lucario. So we're not talking about attackers. We are talking about the cards you need to have in your binder so that you can make any deck you like if you have the attacker. Also, the other rule we go to quite a bit, I am only going to be suggesting Pokemon V, etc. if they work for multiple decks, because otherwise they're going to get pretty expensive. If you just want to buy the best cards in the set, I've already published my top 20. You can go and find out about those ones there. So starting off then with the Pokemon, I think you're going to need 2 to 4 copies of Grotle. And that is because it's got an ability that searches out grass Pokemon. And in the future, if you want to make a grass deck, you may well need this. I think you need 1 to 2 copies of Shaymin V-Star, because even though it's a V-Star, it's got a phenomenal revenge attack, and it's got an ability that heals 120 from each of your benched grass Pokemon. So I could absolutely see, if grass decks are good in the future, and they're not really that good now, but if we get to a point in the future where grass decks are good, then we could see that actually Shaymin becomes a very good card indeed. Now, I think you need 2 to 4 copies of Empoleon, probably closer to 4 if we're honest, because it's got that amazing emergency surfing ability that lets you, if you've got an empty hand, put it from the discard pile onto the bench and draw free cards. I've said this a couple of times on this channel before. I'm going to be trying to put one of these in every deck I make from now on, because the idea that I can have a Pokemon just sitting in my discard ready whenever, and if I ever end up with a 0-card hand or a card that I can make a 0-card hand, I can then get an emergency draw free. I adore this. I think Empoleon is a little bit nuts. We also need a couple copies of Lumineon, and yes, I know it's a Pokemon V, but it's absolutely ridiculous. Remember how we all had Tapu Lele in our decks? Yeah, we need this in our decks as well. It goes and searches a supporter card at any point during the game, unless it's turn 1 going first, when you're not allowed to play supporter cards. To be fair, you can still search it, you just can't play it now. It's nuts, it's brilliant, it's ridiculous, it's amazing, it is guaranteed to see a huge amount of play. You're going to need a couple. You're also going to need a couple Manaphy because it's bringing Bench Barrier, or Wave Veil as it's called nowadays, back into the Pokemon TCG. It is a way to prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon's attacks, and it's huge. Against decks like Jolteon, it is going to be an absolute godsend. It is going to be the thing that keeps you in the game rather than being run through. And I'm not saying you're definitely going to need to play it in every deck. Some you will, some you won't. But I absolutely am saying you're going to need a couple copies of this ready to go into any deck you make. I think you're going to need 2 to 4 copies of LIEPARD. And look, LIEPARD is bad Chinchino. It can't be searched with level ball, and it's got a worse attack. It is bad Chinchino. And I don't care. Because Chinchino is going to be rotating at the end of August, beginning of September. At which point, LIEPARD's going to be our only option. So yeah, I think LIEPARD's pretty gosh darn good. I'm going to be playing LIEPARD in a whole bunch of decks, and I'm assuming a bunch of you are as well. And I say 2 to 4 here because I have played decks with a 4-4 line of Chinchino. I could see myself doing that for LIEPARD again in the future. I also think you need 1 to 2 copies of ZAMAZENTA. It's got that ability, lets you discard your hand and draw 5 cards. And sure, it ends your turn, but so did Zacian. And Zacian saw a bunch of play. And I know that Zacian also let you attach the energy. That's not got past me. But think of all those decks, like control decks, like Blacephalon, etc., that played Zacian despite not playing Metal Energy. Those decks are going to need something when Zacian rotates in August, September time. That is going to be ZAMAZENTA. In any deck that is a slow starter, or any deck that doesn't really attack every turn, ZAMAZENTA becomes a phenomenal option, and that's why you need it. You also need 2 to 4 copies of Bibarel. And Bibarel is very much like LIEPARD. It is a Stage 1 Pokemon that sits on your bench and acts as a draw engine. I think Bibarel's better. I put it higher in my top 20. Once during your turn, you may draw until you have 5 cards in your hand. And unlike stuff like Kricketune, this is not limited to once during your turn. I mean, it is, but it's once per Bibarel, whereas Kricketune is once regardless of how many Kricketune you've got in play. So you could potentially have 4 of these out and be drawing 20 cards during your turn. Bibarel is nuts. In terms of pure digging, it's going to draw you more cards than something like LIEPARD, and I think you need 2 to 4 copies of it. I also think you need 1 to 2 copies of Arceus V-Star, and I'm sorry about this, because I know it's a V-Star and I know it's not going to be the cheapest one. In Japan, it is inarguably the most expensive by a bit of a margin, but the fact of the matter is, it's got Starbirth. And even if you never use Trinity Nova, even if you never use the attack, that ability is ridiculous. Once during your turn, you can search your deck for any 2 cards and put them in your hand. In the late game, that basically says, grab what you need to win the game. And I don't know about you, but I can see myself playing a 1-1 or 2-2 line of this in a bunch of random decks, just because that ability Starbirth is so gosh darned ridiculous. I also think you need 1 to 2 copies of Tornadus, and I know not everyone will agree with me on this one, and that's absolutely fine. Remember, this is just a buy list I'm giving you. This is just advice. If you don't want to buy these cards, don't. And if you want to buy extra ones, do. There we go. But Tornadus has an ability that makes your opponent switch their active with one of their bench. And yes, they get to choose, but this is still an ability which is going to win a whole bunch of games, and you're probably going to want a couple copies in your binder just in case. Now, moving over to trainers, remember my rule is generally just buy a playset, because you never know what's going to end up being good in the future. Except for Barry and Friends in Gala, I feel very confident you don't need those. There we go. So we want a playset of Ace Roller's Premonition. Your opponent reveals their hand. You draw a card for each trainer you find there. That could be a good draw engine in some decks, especially if we ever see good item lock coming back. Blunder Policy is a Pokemon tool, and anytime you flip coins for a damage or an effect of your attack, and it's tails, you draw 3 cards. That's going to help out in a bunch of flippy decks. Boss's Orders, obviously most of you probably have a playset by now, but if you don't, go and get Cyrus. Café Master chooses 3 bench Pokemon, and for each of them you search for a different type of basic energy and attach it. Sure, it ends your turn, unless you've got Alchemy active, but the fact of the matter is, this is really good for setting up in the early game, and some decks are going to want to use it. Charon's Care lets you pick up a colourless Pokemon that's got damage counters on, stops it being KO'd. That's ridiculous. Colourless decks are going to love it. Choice Bout is a phenomenally over-the-top card that lets you do 30 more damage to Pokemon V. Obviously, that's going to see a ridiculous amount of play. That is one of the best cards in the entire set. In the game, in fact. Cleansing Gloves lets you do 30 more damage to Psychic Pokemon. And while we're here, Hunting Gloves lets you do 30 more damage to Dragon Pokemon. And they're very niche, but you may end up in the future having a bad matchup against those kind of decks and just needing an extra 30 damage. These will work. Of course, the existence of Choice Bout means that they've got to be non-Pokemon V for it to even matter. Collapse Stadium says that each player can only have 4 bench Pokemon. That is going to be annoying. A bunch of people are going to want to play this. You'll need a playset. Cynthia's Ambition is a new draw card. Draw 2, got 5 cards in your hand, unless one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. And incidentally, it doesn't matter how it was knocked out, just needs to be knocked out. Then you draw until you have 8 cards in hand instead. It's a good draw card. People are going to want to play it. Fresh Water Set heals 20 from each of your Pokemon. Against a spread deck, this is good. In a deck where you're using lots of different Pokemon or self-damaging, this is good. It's not going to see a huge amount of play, but some decks will like it. Gloria searches for 3 basic Pokemon that don't have a rule box and puts them straight onto your bench. Sure, you don't get any coming into play abilities, and that's a little bit sad, but it's great for setting up in the early game. Kindler, you've got to discard a fire energy from your hand, though that does give a good combo with Magma Basin. And then you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, put 2 of them in your hand, yes. The others go back into your deck, you're just getting 2 of the top 7 cards. That is good for consistency in fire decks. Speaking of which, Magma Basin lets you attach a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your benched fire Pokemon. Sure, you got to take 2 damage counters, but we've actually seen a bunch of Pokemon that use this as an advantage, and fire decks are going to use this for extra consistency. It's going to be great. I think you're going to need 4 copies of Marnie's Pride. It attaches a basic energy from your discard pile to your bench Pokemon. And sure, it's arguably just a slightly better version of BD that doesn't see that much play, although it does see a bit. But honestly, there's enough decks that play from the discard and need extra energy that even if this doesn't see a huge amount of play immediately, I could see it seeing play here and there. Pot Helmet gets attached to a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, and then takes 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. Cool. It stops damage. And we have seen cards like this be good in the past, because they can prevent key KOs. Professor's Research, like I said with Boss's Orders, you've probably got a playset by now, but if you don't, it's back with Professor Rowan, so go nuts. Roseanne's Backup is a great recovery card because it can get you a Pokemon and a tool and a stadium and an energy. Not basic energy, basic or special, either's fine. And it's not going to be great in every deck, not every deck's going to use it, but in control decks and in some others, being able to recover all of those things is going to be great. Team Yell's Cheer shuffles up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon and supporter cards other than Team Yell's Cheer from your discard pile into your deck. It's basically just a really good way to recover supporter cards, and especially control decks are going to love it. Ultra Ball, you may well have a playset of Ultra Ball. I have many playsets of Ultra Ball because it's come out in sets in the past and it's exactly the same card now. But if you don't, run and get yourself a playset as fast as possible. It's a staple in every deck. And then finally, Double Turbo Energy. It is a special energy that provides 2 energy, both colourless, but you do 20 less damage for your attacks. But so many decks are either not going to care because that 20 less damage isn't relevant, doesn't stop them hitting key numbers, or because they're not doing damage anyway. Let me be clear, this is going to be another one of those, which is basically just going to make decks that weren't viable. It's great. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. The full buy list is on the board, and now it's over to you guys. Are there any on here that you don't think should be? Are there any not on here that you think should be? Which cards are you going to be running out to pick up? Personally, I'm going to be going and grabbing a whole bunch of Wormadam because that deck looks amazing, but I couldn't put it on the list because I don't think everybody needs Wormadam. I do. You might not. But I want to hear from you guys, ladies and gentlemen, so let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.